April 18th, 1942. The North Pacific Ocean. The waves are 30 feet high. The wind is screaming at 40 knots. On the heaving deck of the aircraft carrier USS Hornet, 16 massive shadows are chained down. They shouldn't be there. These are B-25 Mitchell medium bombers, land-based aircraft, heavy, wide, designed to take off from mile-long concrete runways. Today, they have less than 500 feet, and they are carrying 2,000 pounds of bombs. Inside the lead plane, Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle revs his engines to maximum power. The brakes are holding the plane back, shaking violently. He isn't just fighting the short runway. He is fighting physics. He knows, and every man behind him knows, that they don't have enough fuel to return. They don't even have enough fuel to reach their safe landing zone in China anymore. This isn't a mission. It's a one-way ticket.
4 months earlier, the United States was on its knees. Pearl Harbor had shattered the Pacific Fleet. The Japanese Empire was unstoppable. They took Wake Island. They took Guam. They took the Philippines. The American public was terrified. They looked at the map and asked, "Is California next?" President Franklin D. Roosevelt demanded a strike. He didn't want a defensive battle. He wanted to hit the Japanese where they lived. He wanted to bomb Tokyo. It wasn't about military damage. It was psychological. He needed to prove to the Japanese emperor and to the American people that Japan was not invincible. But there was a problem: geography. Japan was protected by thousands of miles of ocean. U.S. Navy aircraft carriers couldn't get close enough. Their fighters had a range of only 300 miles. To launch them, the carriers would have to sail right into the deadly Japanese defensive ring. They would be sunk before they could launch a single plane. The solution came from a submarine captain named Francis Lowe. He was watching B-25 bombers practicing takeoffs at a naval airfield painted to look like a carrier deck. He asked a crazy question. If a B-25 can take off from a short runway, could we put one on a carrier? The Navy engineers laughed. Impossible, they said. The wingspan is too wide. It will hit the tower. It's too heavy. It will drop into the sea. But there was one man who didn't believe in the word impossible.
Lieutenant Colonel James Jimmy Doolittle. He was a stunt pilot, an air racer, and a doctor of science from MIT, a rare combination of daredevil and genius. He did the math. A standard B-25 needed 2,500 feet to take off. The deck of the USS Hornet offered 467 feet. Mathematically, it couldn't be done, unless you cheated. Doolittle ordered the planes stripped. They removed the heavy liaison radio. Gone. They removed the heavy belly gun turret. Gone. They even removed the top-secret Norden bomb sight, a piece of technology worth thousands of dollars, because it was too heavy and they didn't want it falling into Japanese hands. Instead, they installed a Mark Twain bomb sight, made of 2 pieces of aluminum costing 20 cents. To save weight, they removed the tail guns, but a bomber without tail guns is a sitting duck for enemy fighters, so Doolittle improvised. He had the mechanics install 2 broomsticks, painted black, to look like machine guns. It was a bluff, but every pound mattered. He gathered 80 volunteers, the cream of the crop. He told them, "This is a dangerous mission. It will take you out of the country. I can't tell you where you're going. If you want to back out, do it now." Not a single man left the room. They trained in Florida. They learned to slam the throttles to maximum while holding the brakes. They learned to drop the flaps to get lift instantly. They learned to fly a 15-ton bomber like a fighter jet. On April 1st, 1942, the USS Hornet left San Francisco. Even the sailors on board didn't know the mission. They stared at the giant bombers tied to the deck and bet money on what was happening. Was it a transport mission? A publicity stunt? Once they were at sea, Captain Mark Mitcher announced over the loudspeaker, "This force is bound to Tokyo." The ship erupted in cheers.
April 18th, 07:38 a.m. The task force was still 650 miles from Japan. The plan was to get within 400 miles, launch at dusk, bomb at night, and land in China by morning. But plans rarely survive contact with the enemy. A Japanese patrol boat, the Nitomaru, spotted the American fleet. Before the cruiser Nashville could sink it, the patrol boat radioed a warning to Tokyo. American carriers sighted. Admiral William Bull Halsey had a choice. If he continued, the Japanese Navy would intercept the carriers. He would lose the fleet. If he turned back, the mission failed. Or he could launch now, 10 hours early, 170 miles farther than planned. Launching now meant the bombers would run out of fuel before reaching the safe airfields in China. It meant they would be ditching in the dark, in enemy territory, or in the sea. The order came: launch planes. To Colonel Doolittle and gallant command, good luck and God bless you. The weather was a nightmare. The ship was pitching violently in 30-foot swells. The bow would rise up, then smash down into the trough of a wave. If a plane launched while the bow was down, it would be rammed into the sea. Timing was everything. Doolittle went first. He had 467 feet of wet deck. He held the brakes until the engines were shaking the airframe apart. The launch officer waited for the bow to dip, then rise, then rise. Go. Doolittle released the brakes. The B-25 lurched forward. It looked agonizingly slow. 200 feet, 300 feet. The left wheel slipped on the wet steel. Doolittle corrected. He reached the end of the deck. The plane wasn't flying. It simply fell off the edge of the ship. The crew on the deck gasped. For a second he disappeared below the bow. Then, agonizingly slowly, the B-25 rose into view, flying just feet above the Whitecaps. One by one, 15 more planes followed. They clawed their way into the sky. Behind them was the safety of the fleet. Ahead of them was 600 miles of open ocean, the entire Japanese Empire, and an empty fuel tank waiting at the end. The Doolittle Raiders were airborne. Next stop, Tokyo.
For 6 hours, they flew just above the waves. They flew so low that salt spray coated their windshields. They maintained radio silence. At noon, they hit the coast of Japan. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon in Tokyo. People were out in the parks. A baseball game was being played. They heard the roar of engines. They looked up. They saw twin-engine bombers, but they didn't panic. They waved. The Japanese propaganda machine had told the people that their homeland was untouchable. No enemy could ever reach Tokyo. So when the civilians saw the American stars on the wings, their brains couldn't process it. They assumed it was a Japanese Air Force exercise, until the bomb bay doors opened. At 12:30 p.m., Doolittle's plane reached the center of Tokyo. He pulled up to 1,200 feet. He targeted a munitions factory. 4 incendiary bombs dropped. The factories exploded. Smoke billowed into the sky. Suddenly, the waving stopped. The air raid sirens began to wail, a sound Tokyo had never heard before. Panic erupted. The Japanese air defenses were caught completely off guard. Anti-aircraft guns fired wildly into the sky, but the American planes were moving too fast. One by one, the 16 raiders hit their targets. Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, Nagoya. They didn't level the cities like the B-29s would years later, The physical damage was minimal, but the psychological damage, it was catastrophic. The emperor was in the palace. The divine land had been violated. The myth of invincibility was shattered in 30 seconds. But for the raiders, the easy part was over. They had dropped their bombs. Now they looked at their fuel gauges. The needles were dropping, and night was falling.
The plan was to land at refueling fields in Quchao, China, but because they launched early, they were short on fuel. To make matters worse, a storm front moved in. Headwinds slowed them down. Visibility dropped to 0. Imagine flying a 15-ton bomber in pitch-black darkness through a thunderstorm with the fuel light flickering over territory you don't know. One by one, the engines began to quit. The pilots had a choice: crash land in the dark rice paddies of China or bail out into the unknown. Doolittle ordered his crew to jump. He put the plane on autopilot, climbed out the hatch, and fell into the rainy darkness. He expected to die or be captured. It was a night of chaos. Of the 16 planes, 15 crashed in or near China. One, plane number 8, piloted by Captain York, was so low on fuel they diverted to Russia. They landed safely near Vladivostok, but were imprisoned by the Soviets for over a year. Back in China, the other 75 men were scattered across the mountains, injured, lost, hunted. This is where the humanity of the story shines. The Chinese people found them. They saw these strange foreigners who fell from the sky. They didn't speak the language, but they knew they were enemies of Japan. They fed them. They hid them. They carried the wounded on makeshift stretchers for miles to escape Japanese patrols. Most of the raiders were saved by the courage of Chinese civilians, but not all of them.
2 crews crash-landed too close to Japanese positions. 8 Americans were captured. They were tortured for months. The Japanese wanted to know, where did you come from? Where is Shangri-La? 3 of them, Dean Hallmark, William Farrow, and Harold Spatz, were executed by firing squad. Another died of starvation in prison. They paid the ultimate price. But the heaviest price was paid by the people who helped them. Enraged by the raid and the Chinese support for the pilots, the Japanese army launched the Zhejiang-Jiangxi campaign. It wasn't a battle. It was a retribution. They burned villages. They poisoned wells. They slaughtered anyone suspected of helping the Americans. Historians estimate that 250,000 Chinese civilians were killed in the retaliation. Think about that. 250,000 lives lost to save 64 American pilots. It is a debt of blood that the surviving Doolittle raiders never forgot. Decades later, they would still weep when talking about the Chinese villagers. The morning after the crash, Jimmy Doolittle sat on a pile of debris. He told his sergeant, "I've lost all 16 planes. I failed the mission. I'm going to be court-martialed." He truly believed he had failed. He didn't realize what he had actually done. The raid had terrified the Japanese High Command. They realized their defensive perimeter was too small. Admiral Yamamoto decided he needed to expand. He needed to draw out the American carriers and destroy them once and for all. He chose a target called Midway. The
The Doolittle raid forced Japan into a trap. It led directly to the Battle of Midway, the turning point where Japan would lose 4 aircraft carriers and the war would flip in an instant. Doolittle wasn't court-martialed. He was promoted to general. He received the Medal of Honor. He lived to be 96 years old. But every year, on April 18th, the surviving raiders would meet. They would open a bottle of cognac from 1896, the year Doolittle was born. They would toast the men who didn't make it, and they would toast the brave people of China. The Doolittle raid was technically a failure. It did little damage. It lost every plane. But it proved one thing to the world. When freedom is threatened, there is no such thing as impossible. If you think the bravery of these men deserves to be remembered, hit the like button. And if you want to know what happened next at the Battle of Midway, subscribe to the channel. I'm WWII Untold Chronicles. Thanks for watching.